Chilling tales for dark nights.
Want to make sure you never miss a Chilling Tales for Dark Nights video again? Be sure to subscribe and hit that bell to turn on notifications. The following program is a production of Chilling Entertainment and the creative team at Chilling Tales for Dark Nights, and a proud member of the Simply Scary Podcasts Network. Visit simplyscarypodcast.com to learn more about this and our other weekly storytelling programs, and become a patron today to show your support and get instant access to our extensive archive of downloadable ad-free tales of terror. Thank you for listening, and enjoy the show.
Good evening. I'm storyteller Otis Jiry, and I ain't your grandfather. From where I'm from, we don't do bedtime stories. And if that's what you were expecting, you're in the wrong place. If it's terrifying tales you're after, well then, I've got just the thing. Get comfortable, settle in, turn off the lights, if you dare. Your night is about to get a whole lot darker. Who needs sleep anyway?
Support for this episode is proudly brought to you by BetterHelp. We're deep into summer, and y'all know what that means. Mosquitoes mostly, followed closely by ticks, then your assorted black flies, sheep flies, the dreaded horse flies, and finally rounded out by leeches, for peeps out there who like to get wet. This season sucks. Your blood, one way or another, and those of you looking forward to a sexy delousing with your significant other, that's gross. For me, and most of you, it's a lot of anxiety to deal with. Almost as if they're sucking out your quality of life with all that blood. For me, the stress was just getting to be too much. Luckily, BetterHelp is there to delouse those places that your summer fling can't reach. Your mental health. BetterHelp isn't a crisis line, and it's not self-help. It's professional counseling done online that's so convenient you can do it from the safety of your own home, protected from the summer heat and most of the bugs. All it takes is a quick online assessment, and you'll be matched with the licensed counselor best suited for your needs. It's so efficient that you'll be communicating with your therapist in under 24 hours. Not bad. Not bad at all. So don't take the dog days lying down. I want you to start living a happier life today. And as a listener, you'll get 10% off your first month by visiting our sponsor at betterhelp.com/horror. Again, that's BetterHelp, HELP.com/horror. Thank you for your support of this program and of the sponsors that make it possible. Good evening, you're listening to Scary Stories Told in the Dark. Welcome to Season 9, Episode 2. I'm your host, Otis Jiry, and in this episode I'll be performing 4 tales to terrify you, courtesy of author Keith McDuffee. About deathly dinners, appalling allergies, macabre managers, and revealing recordings. You're listening to the standard edition of tonight's program, which contains the first 2 spine-tingling stories. If you'd like to show your support and enjoy an extended version of this and other episodes with twice the terror, visit simplyscarypodcast.com and click Patrons in the upper menu to sign up today. Thank you for your support. Now it's time to take a walk together down the moonlit trail. So lock your doors, turn your lights down low, and settle in. The show is about to begin. Dinner with friends. Not exactly a setting for the horrific, you may think. But in our first tale this evening from Keith McDuffee, the conversation around the table isn't exactly inspiring Edward, who finally spies someone of interest sitting down elsewhere. But unlike his dinner companions, Edward's about to get a little more food for thought than he realizes. Without further ado, I present to you a taste worth savoring. In between the mozzarella sticks and the second course, I'm thinking about dying. I don't think of anyone or anything in particular, and most especially am not thinking about myself. I happen to like life most of the time, and as far as I know, I'm not proceeding down that path at an accelerated rate for any particular reason. It's the process itself I consider. Dying. Emphasis on the ing. Quick or not, the road to death is always a process. In the absence of immortality, every living thing begins the process of dying from the moment of creation, with each following moment a step closer to crossing the threshold of death's door. Some spend their entire short lives doing anything to stave it off. Some encourage it, whether meaning to or not. But in the end, until the end, it's always coming. There's no choice. It's a process ending with only one result. The taste of fried cheese and marinara lingers, and somehow dying comes to mind. Again, not my dying, and not of anyone in particular. Not yet, at least. Minutes tick by, and we sit and wait for the arrival of the guest of honor, and of new hot plates to our table of 5. The conversation within the circle is exclusive of me and all but inspired, and it's always about work. Living and dying in a macabre balancing act, where one task takes a fair amount of time to achieve, and the other none at all. Despite that, they both come to a simultaneous end. Who thinks about that? At dinner time, no less. I suppose I do. I suppose it's because of my present company. I suppose it could also be because of her. I spot the old woman about the time our menus are whisked away. As I said, the gum flapping in the general vicinity is as uninviting as it often tends to be. With my reading material gone, and with nothing in arm's reach to keep my eyes entertained, my attention is forcibly diverted, and there she is. Mid to late 70s, I'd say. Probably her name is something like Agnes or Edith. Helen, maybe. Or Alice. Well-dressed, but nothing at all fancy. The sort of someone you'd likely see gladly kneeling in prayer within a church pew, or shuffling into a bingo hall like it's the best part of her day. Or, I suppose, dining alone in a place like this. Simple, orthopedic shoes, stark white hair, drawn up tightly in a typical bun. She's been here many times before, probably every Sunday. Probably the same meal, a nice piece of fish because it's easy on the tummy. Maybe start out with a small salad or a spicy minestrone with a side of saltines if she's feeling frisky. Finish off the evening with a nice hot cuppa, only herbal, or else she'd never get to sleep after the local news. To highlight that she's alone, in a chair across from her table for 2 sits her fat gray handbag, a monstrosity befitting a long trail hiker, with a knitted shawl draped along the back seat. And every night, she dines alone. She chooses to sit in what's likely the same seat she sinks her skirted ass into every week, rather than hole up in her tiny kitchen back home. Because where else will she get a nice piece of fish? With rigid posture, she awaits that tea or small indulgence of cake, glancing around at nothing in particular and with a tease of a smile. And I wonder if this woman is thinking of dying, that the end of the ing is closer at hand for her than for a good deal of the rest of the patrons in this restaurant. Is every Sunday just one more spent dying? Still one more spent eating in this same goddamn restaurant, eating the same goddamn meal alone? And please God, or death, or whomever I'm supposed to be begging to, just bring me to the end of this journey now, so I can cease wondering, day in and day out, when will it stop? And who, if anyone, would answer? If not God, but Death himself were to take a seat at that table for two, if he were to tell her he was there to dine on mozzarella sticks and to end her part of the process of living and of dying and dining alone, what of that smile? Like some inmate on death row, her timer at once becomes set and known. But unlike the guilty as charged, she hasn't the choice of a final meal at that point. It's done and gone. No medium rare steak, no hamburger and fries, just that piece of goddamn fish. I remain oblivious to the dialogue carrying on in the immediate vicinity, and find myself considering ungodly mischief. Ungodly is the right word for it. This is unlike me. I'm generally one to keep to myself, but even more than the concept of dying, this woman fascinates me. It defies most explanation, other than my feeling the very impatience I face to be distracting and painful. If I were to become death, what should she do? What should she say? I'd only know if I found out for myself. The paper napkin on my lap falls to the floor above my backpack as I get to my feet. The others pay no mind to me, and likely assume I'm off to hit the head. My stomach lurches with violent butterflies. My legs are jelly. Still, my feet find their way between tables of patrons along a seamlessly endless 20 feet of cheap patterned carpet. When I stop, I'm standing behind the purse-filled chair. She looks up and says nothing, her look unchanged. "May I sit?" I ask. I'm surprised at my own tone of calm and confidence, but I make no show of it. She again says nothing and gestures an open hand to the chair in invitation. Rather than carry a look of worry regarding this strange young man asking for a seat at her table, her slight smile grows. I place the purse on the floor beside the chair and have a seat. "Thank you," I say. She nods. I glance over at the table I'd left and at the others around me. Those who aren't eating are chatting or busy with their eyes glued to a phone. No one is paying us any mind. All seats remain full. "What can I do for you?" the woman asks. Her total lack of concern is disquieting, and I resist the urge to stammer. Instead, I straighten, then lean in closely, fixed onto her blue eyes beyond thick-framed glasses. "It's okay," I say. She remains unmoved for a moment. Then her eyes blink. Twice. She leans back into her chair as though exhausted, cocking her head to one side to consider me. But that smile never fades. She peers, amused. "Okay," she asks. "Yes. Okay for what?" I relax and match her position. I'm not sure how the words leave me, but I say them just the same. "Let it go," I say. "It's okay. It's time." Her lips purse, and her eyes grow wide. I expect then that she'll call for help, or at the very least, storm away with a fair amount of urgency. I begin to consider my own escape plan, not caring for a moment what my dinner mates might think of my hasty retreat. But the scream never comes. She never leaves her seat. She raises a hand to cover her mouth. Tears begin to flow, though she doesn't cry. From beneath her hand, she snickers. My performance of appearing dumbfounded is second-rate at best. This isn't a reaction I'd consider at all, least of all from her. What? I ask. What's so funny? The woman does a worse job of suppressing her laughter as she attempts to speak. You, she says. So you're death now, is it? Come to take me away from it all, are you? I shoot looks around. I'm relieved to find no one is interested in us, despite the woman's raised voice. Regardless, I wonder if I should cut my losses then. I'm unsure I can recover. I'm unsure of why I'm even here. The woman dabs at wet eyes with her napkin as she catches her breath. You do think about dying, don't you? I asked. She laughs again, this time with distinct fervor and zest. Think about dying? She says. You ask if I think about dying? Me? Yes, I say. Everyone is dying. We all are. Don't you think about dying? Though the words spill out, I'm unsure why I bother to continue the charade. She removes her glasses and wipes again at her eyes, letting her laughter dissipate. When she speaks next, she's no longer amused. First of all, thank you so much for that bit of humor, she says. I don't believe I've laughed like that in, God's age, I tell you. But to answer your question, yes, Edward, I think about dying all the time. The butterflies I'd felt before are now the size of birds. Though the pull to stand and run is fierce, my body cannot seem to comply. I'm induced of a high that is neither of euphoria nor calming, but of pure perplexity. How do you know my name? I managed to ask. I think you know why. It's what led you over here, after all. What led me was impatience and boredom. What led me was this woman who intrigued me in a most unusual way. What led me was the thought of dying and all things living, progressing to an eventual end. That's right, she says, as though in answer to my thoughts. She turns to look at the table from which I come, and my eyes follow. All 5 seats are occupied. All 5, including my own. Seated in it, with head rested upon folded arms, on the table, is a mid-20s man with an unkempt head of hair, an even more unkempt beard who appears to have succumbed to the premature pull of sleep. Only this is not sleep. This is not some man. It's me. Somehow I'm looking at me, and yet I don't feel quite so surprised. The old woman's tone shifts to sincere pity. I'm sorry, son, but it looks like they haven't quite noticed yet, she says. The me, seated at the other table, still remains with closed eyes, mouth agape, and face glistening with a fine layer of sweat. The so-called colleagues that circle me carry on with their mundane conversation in a murmur I can't quite understand from here. They remain either oblivious to my situation or selectively ignorant and apathetic. I again find myself unsurprised. I don't expect you to understand, says the woman, as I slump back into my chair and face her. It's a lot to take in, I know. How'd it happen? I ask, slumping back into my chair and facing her. Her eyes study me, as she at first seems unsure of how to answer. Can't be a heart attack, I think. I'm not in that bad a shape. I must have choked. Death by fried cheese, and in this godforsaken dive, with its loud red-gray patterned carpeting and smoke-stained fleur-de-lis wallpaper that's seen decades of greasy chicken fumes in smoking section diners. I'm a dead spoke in a 5-person wheel. At least the tale of my passing in their midst will give them conversational material worthy of paying attention to. Pity I won't be around to partake. How did it happen? The woman repeats of me. You walked over here and you sat down. I looked at her, quite unconvinced and unsure. I got up? Can't say it happens very often, but it's what you did. You just got up. She makes a lifting motion with her hands as she says this, as though conjuring something from the table. And here you are. I know you say I shouldn't understand, but this makes no sense. You mean that just because I got up and came over here, now I'm dead? I'm afraid that's how it works. Not quite sure why there's one of the likes of you every once in a great while. One who thinks, hey, look at her, or look at him. Think I'll go have me a chat because she looks interesting. Or in your case, that I look like someone to fuss about with. But I saw you. I can see you. Can't others see you? Come to talk to you? She shakes her head. Like I said, it happens once in a great while. Great while. Not quite sure how it happens. I tried changing my appearance to be much less attractive than I'd been in the past, but it seems this, she spreads her arms as though to present herself, was too tempting a target for the likes of you, Edward. Well, if no one can see you, why look like a normal person at all? I mean, you're Death, after all, right? Death's supposed to look scary-looking, in a dark cloak or something. After that, she laughs. Oh, and I assume I have a scythe as well. And how would you have reacted if I'd been sitting over here looking like that? No doubt you'd tell your friends, and they'd just as well think you have committed, and rightly so. Besides, what kind of thing would that be to those who see me only once they've passed? Why, they'd be scared to death if they weren't dead already. Much better to greet them as a beautiful woman, or a handsome young man, a kindly old lady. She pulls her purse up onto the table and removes a compact from it. She applies a dark pink rouge to her cheeks as she examines herself in its tiny mirror. I know you're confused, Edward. Lord knows I am as well. I don't quite know what to make of people like you, and, well, neither does he, if you can believe that. So that's it, then? So now I'm just dead? She makes a finishing dab at her nose and stashes the compact back away. Well, that's up to you, Edward, she says. Up to me? How can me, going from dead to not dead, be up to me? What's done is done, right? You see, Edward, I'm not quite ready for you yet, she says. Actually, it's more that I'm not ready to be done with you yet. Done with me? What the hell's that supposed to mean? She cocks her head to one side and looks at me, as though she's about to explain the cruel realities of the world to an oblivious grandchild. Edward, have you ever done something so good that you simply wished it would never end? A delicious piece of candy as a child. A girl, perhaps. A nice piece of fish, as you put it. I'm quick to comprehend her analogy and cringe at the thought. You're using me, I said. You've been using me. Using. More like savoring. You need do nothing more than just be who you are. Savoring? You make it sound like I'm a piece of meat, like I'm food. Well, that's precisely what you are to me, Edward, she says. I don't eat, per se. You're not food so much to me as you are sustenance, as all the dead are, as all the dying, as you know, become. Just 10 minutes ago you thought of dying, and how every living thing undergoes the process from the moment of creation. Right you are. Right you are. The woman's eyes dart about, as though to ensure prying ears won't spy upon what juicy secrets she's about to spill. At birth comes the first bite, you see, just a tiny one, just enough for a taste. I suppose you could say it's quite like the first stage of digestion, actually. I must say, at times, it's a bit too good to take from the start, and then it's all over with right quick. Just can't help myself, I'm afraid. And then there are the usual ones, the ones that will do just fine as they are. In due time, they're finished off as well. But there are some I just want to hold on to a bit longer. Their flavor, it's too good. Worth savoring, you see. She sits back in her chair with a pleased look. She continues, "That's you. Your dying is delicious, Edward." To that, I'm unsure of whether to feel offended or relieved. I'm no doubt disgusted. "Then why are you here?" I ask, with a sure attitude of frustration and disbelief. If I'm not ready, if you're not ready for me, then why am I here? Why are you talking to me now? She pouts with disappointment. Isn't it obvious? I'm not here for you, Edward. Who then, I ask. Her lips pout further. Her frown grows comically long. I'm not sure why I asked. I turn to my table again, where my slumped body remains still. Those at the table have their attention elsewhere, to the pair just entering the restaurant. One way or another, Edward, my dinner is about to be served. If you want to go, you'd best be going now. Otherwise, I've got quite the feast ahead of me, don't I? I'm on my feet before she finishes her words. As I approach my chair and prepare to sit, I glance back. The old woman I'd earlier sought to cause trouble upon sat just as she had the first time I'd noticed her, the tease of a smile still brandishing her wrinkled, powdered face. I feel an elbow jab into my ribs. I sit bolt upright, a line of spittle trailing from my chin. "Have a good nap, Sleeping Beauty?" whispers Mark from my right. Tick-tock. Target's arrived. You're on, Eddie. As though I'd just woken up, it takes me a moment to get my bearings. I wipe my face from the edge of the tablecloth and look around the table. Conversation has ceased. All eyes are upon me. My eyes are on them, on the families at the other tables, on her. I'm unsettled. This is not me. Just like last time, Felix says from across the table, sensing my change of disposition. Just like every other time, man. We'll be in the car. The group stands. They pull several 20s from their wallets and throw them onto the table. Before he leaves with the others, Mark puts a hand on my shoulder and leans in close. "Collateral damage is part of the job. Do this and let's go home. It's for the good of the country." I nod as he exits with the others. I reach under the table, into the backpack, and reach in through the unzipped pocket. I toggle the switch. On unsteady feet, I rise and start for the door. The two agents who'd entered earlier are seated at the counter, reading menus. They'll be 10 feet from the blast. But it won't matter. This smoky decor, breaded cheese and fish fillets, it won't matter. Before the door shuts behind me, the old woman calls out, "I know most consider people like you bad, foul, even disgusting and vile. Not me, Edward. Certainly not me." I hope you enjoyed A Taste Worth Savoring by author Keith McDuffie, as performed by yours truly. If you enjoyed that first tale and would love to read more from tonight's very talented feature author, you can help support them by visiting simplyscarypodcast.com/McDuffie. That's simplyscarypodcast.com/MCDUFFEE. Keith has a number of stories published in, well, a number of anthologies, and is a regular among the NoSleep community, though he does have a children's book for those looking for something that won't keep you up at night. If you do decide to stop by the profile, please leave Keith a kind word and let him know you heard about him on this show and that Otis sent you. It would mean a lot to me. Support for this episode is proudly brought to you by BetterHelp. Not all the inherent dangers of summer have multifaceted eyes and blood-sucking proboscises. Some stay perfectly still and wait for you to come up to them. Yep, I'm talking about rattlesnakes. And, like humans at a local Planet Fitness, they just lounge around, pretending to be deep in thought, just waiting for you to step on them. If you've never almost stepped on one, let me tell you, that's primal, hardwired, Homo erectus mortal terror right there. When they hiss, they stick that black forked tongue out in a way that can only be described as utterly obscene. I've been to Planet Fitness and I can deal with those problems. Real rattlesnakes? Now that's another thing altogether. Now, I'm sure there are couples out there who make a sex game out of sucking the poison out of bites, but most of the rest of us would be traumatized. I know I would, which is why I turned to BetterHelp, to suck the poison of anxiety right out of my snake-fearing reptile brain. The best thing about BetterHelp is that BetterHelp comes to me. All I need is a solid internet connection and a scheduled phone or video session with my therapist. Now I can avoid any time spent in an uncomfortable waiting room or recovering from snakebite-induced delirium I picked up on the way to said waiting room. Even better, BetterHelp is more affordable than traditional counseling, and financial aid is available if needed. Maybe the snakes and mosquitoes are getting you down. In that case, feel free to pop in a Bluetooth and go on a walk for your therapy session, because BetterHelp can connect you with a wide variety of specialists able to help you through anything from anxiety and depression to stress, relationship issues, anger, grief, self-esteem, LGBT issues, or anything else that might be coming between you and your happiness. BetterHelp is a service available to clients worldwide and is especially important in places where certain expertise is not locally available. In fact, so many people are using BetterHelp that they're recruiting new counselors in all 50 states. So what are you waiting for? If you want to start living a happier life today, and I know you do, as a listener, you'll get 10% off your first month by visiting our sponsor at betterhelp.com/horror. Join the 1 million people who've taken charge of their mental health. Again, that's BetterHelp, HELP.com/horror. Thank you for your support of this program and of the sponsors that make it possible. Thanks again for your support of this program and of tonight's featured author. Shame that Edward appears to be such a rotten egg. Not the kind of thing I would imagine would be worth savoring, but I assume for somebody, or something, it could be an acquired taste. In our second tale from Keith McDuffee... Oh, I'm sorry, just a moment. I've got a mosquito biting. It's driving me crazy. Ah, there. Well, I guess I should thank my lucky stars that my problems aren't as bad as some, as we're about to hear. Without further ado, I present to you Scars. I don't go into the woods. There are things in there, things that drive my anxiety through the roof at the mere thought of coming close to them. A casual hiker may not notice them, lying low and deep within the surrounding foliage. On a windless day, they remain perfectly still. They don't have to make a move. You'll come close soon enough, and then they're all over you. You won't know of their effect until you're tucked away in your tent, or in your bed at home. The next day. Boy, the next day. Then you'll know. And then it's too late. But I see them. I can't not see them because they're everywhere. When walking down the street, at the playground, even in my goddamn backyard. Jesus, my palms are just itchy thinking about them. They've become the most frightening living things to me in my little corner of the world. I can't believe that God had chosen to create these things. For poison ivy, poison oak, and poison sumac are clearly the work of the devil himself. My brother grew up allergic to peanuts. For my sister, it was cashews and pistachios. This was the deadly kind of allergic, where not the slightest whiff of those nuts could pass by their nostrils without cause to whip out the epinephrine shot. Unlike my siblings, I was lucky enough not to have food allergies of any kind. However, growing up in a household without peanut butter in days before alternatives like almond butter were commonplace meant I had no concept of a good old PB&J, jam and butter, not even close. Though I was clear of food allergies, there was something I did have to stay very far away from. Poison ivy, poison oak, poison sumac, the poison plant trifecta, I call them. This was not your run-of-the-mill allergy, mind you. While 85% of the population is allergic to these plants, most would need to come in physical contact with the leaves to have some sort of reaction. This was not the case for me. A slight breeze off a plant several feet away would carry enough urushiol oil through the air to latch itself onto me. Then came the warm redness later that night. Sometime the next day came the itching. My God, the itching. All from walking too close to the side of the road on a windy day. One of the worst episodes I'd experienced came when I was a boy, while helping my father stack a cord of applewood he cut down that summer. Applewood, as I was told back then, is prime stuff to stoke the stove within the winter. I suppose it must have a sweet burning applesauce smell to it. But what do I know? What do I care? I was getting paid $10. This was going toward a gaming console I'd been dreaming of for months, the Atari 2600. Under a blistering sun, my brother and I hauled split wood onto the bed of my old man's truck, working well past sunset. Sweaty and sunburned, we left, not knowing the full conditions we'd been working in. The logs had been covered with immense patches of glistening poison oak that I'd otherwise have stayed clear, well clear of, had we seen them in the light of day. The next morning, I couldn't open my eyes. My face was swollen to the point of being unrecognizable. My hands were bloated sausages covered in liquid-filled skin bubbles. My inflamed feet wouldn't fit in my shoes. My hearing was partially affected because they'd been so engorged with blisters. It even got inside my nose and on my scalp. I must have gone through 50 bottles of calamine lotion that summer. That awful smelling pink stuff you coat on your rash in hopes of relief from the incessant itching. It would do the trick for about a half an hour if I was lucky, and then I'd be painting more of it on again and again. I looked like the Elephant Man covered in concealer. I'd resorted to drastic measures at times to alleviate the swelling. I'd take a sewing needle, for instance, dip it in rubbing alcohol, then lance the pustules between my fingers in order to drain them enough that I could bend my fingers to hold onto a fork or even wipe my own ass. And yes, the poison oak got there too. But that's not the worst spot to get the itch. The soles of your feet, the palms of your hands. Nothing worse than that. Not even your balls. Calamine lotion doesn't work on soles and palms, and the itching is unending and unbearable. Placing my palms on something hot, however, say a leather seat that had been sitting in the sun all day, somehow provided some brief reprieve. The searing pain was much more tolerable than the itching. In comparison, it was ecstasy. Overall, not a good summer. But I did get my Atari. Now, Ted was a different story. There were a few times I'd gotten bad cases of poison ivy plague during the school year. Maybe not so bad as that summer of blisters, but once bad enough that I was kept out of 6th grade for several days. My absence did not go unnoticed by Ted. "You were out for 3 days because of poison ivy," he said. The two of us just standing at the edge of the schoolyard during recess. "Just because you got a rash?" "Just a rash? Haven't you ever had bad poison ivy before?" Ted shook his head. "Don't think I've ever got it at all." My jaw dropped. "Never? Not even a little?" "Nope." "Count yourself lucky, it sucks." As I said this, Ted wore that faraway look of his that I'd seen too often. The kind that says there's an idea brewing within that thick skull that's boiling into action before it's had a healthy seasoning of reason. A true recipe for disaster that I'd seen all too often. "What's it look like?" he asked, his eyes scanning the ground amongst the dense thicket of brush nearby. It didn't take me long to point them out. I'd been eyeing them since we got there, and I'd known they were there since the school year had started. And I presently stood as close as I was ever willing to get. I pointed to the glistening patch of leaves beneath a crop of trees. "There's a bunch of it right there," I said. "Those green leaves with red? A ton of it." Ted didn't hesitate. He was halfway there before I could raise a stink. "He's right here," he called out. His pointing finger was so damn close to the poisonous bouquet. My mind's eye saw the slick oils drifting through the air and into his willing, exposed skin, and I shivered at the thought of being remotely as close to it as Ted was. I nodded. I'd get away from it if I were you. Except he wasn't me. The ridiculous idea of his had already bloomed into his mind, and he was dead set on seeing it through. He stepped directly into the patch, picked up one of the leaves, then another, then a whole branch. I couldn't breathe. My own skin began to feel hot at the mere thought of being in Ted's shoes. Shoes that might not fit his feet anymore. My God, his hands, I thought. His fingers, his palms. Dear Lord, his palms. It was like watching someone bite into the hottest pepper in the world with idiotic, wild abandon. But this was worse, much worse. The mouth burn of a Carolina Reaper may feel like the fires of 1,000 suns, but that's an agony short-lived. Ted was in for days of hell on fire. "What are you doing?" I breathed. It's then that I noticed I'd been subconsciously distancing myself from the whole scene, as though Ted's disturbance of the plants would affect me where I stood. In fact, even at 10 feet away, for me, that wasn't far from a possibility. "We got that math test tomorrow," he said. "With Miss Sullivan?" "Yeah, but, well, I'm not going to be here to take it." He took the words right out of my mouth. Ted bunched the leaves in his hand, as though what he held were harmless bits of greenery, not the evil carriers of hell oil they were. I knew it was too late for him then, unless he immediately scrubbed his hands with rubbing alcohol. He was in for it. And I, for one, was going nowhere near him at that point. Best friend be damned, as far as I was concerned. He was a walking plague. I didn't stop there. I didn't protest. I couldn't protest. And if I could have, it wouldn't have mattered. At best, my words would have been unintelligible gasps and stammers. Anything worth hearing would have been ignored. All of his chips were pushed to the center now. He was all in. As one might clean themselves with a bar of soap, Ted began to rub the poison ivy all over his body. Arms, legs, face. For good measure, he replenished his supply of leaves when he'd rubbed some down to bits of pulp, then did the entire exercise again. Just when I thought he was through, he did the unthinkable. He turned from the rest of the schoolyard as though he were about to sneak a piss, pulled the front of his pants out with his empty hand, and jammed the other hand in. And then his hand came out empty. It was suicide. I was witnessing my best friend's self-immolation and couldn't move a finger to stop him, for in doing so, I'd surely be dooming myself. "You think that'll be enough to get me out of school tomorrow?" he asked. "What'd you do? That's enough to keep you out for like a month." He pumped his fist. "Yes! Even better!" My eyes didn't leave Ted for the rest of the day. Where he sat, what he touched, what urinal he used. Short of wearing gloves and a mask, I behaved like some crazy germaphobe. As far as I could tell, Ted wore that bunch of leaves down his pants all damn day. Pants that I hoped he'd set fire come the end of the day, along with the rest of his clothes once he realized the enormous mistake he'd made. Side note about fire and poison ivy. Fire, as it turns out, is not an effective eliminator of urushiol oil. I learned this the hard way, of course, during my junior year of high school, along with a sizable portion of my fellow classmates. One of the rare times I dared enter the woods was for high school parties. It was isolated, difficult for the cops to get to, and had an unlimited selection of places to hide in and make out. When no parent-free houses were available, it served its purposes well enough. Besides, an abundance of cheap alcoholic beverages, a natural ingredient of a party in the woods is a bonfire. A natural ingredient of a bonfire is wood, or at least a combustible material of any kind, sometimes a tire, sometimes the back seat ripped out of someone's old car, and sometimes random brush. In this case, on this particular evening, brush and tangled wood poison oak. And a byproduct of a bonfire? Smoke, and lots of it. It gets in your lungs, your hair, your clothes, and you bring all that home with you. If you're not completely blitzed before attempting to crawl into bed, maybe you take a shower, therefore not waking up the next afternoon smelling like a campfire. And if you were somehow thorough enough, perhaps you don't succumb to the full onset of poison oak you'd been hanging around in all night. Like me, everyone, save for a few, spent at least the following few days in hell. From that point, not only would I stay far from the woods, I'd go nowhere near open fire pits, saved for ones fueled by gas. Until then, I never known what it was like to get poison oak in your mouth, or on your dick. Everyone's got to take a leak at a raging beer party at some point. And here Ted was about to get the full experience, his first time. When I finally saw Ted exit the school bus that afternoon, I was sure it was the last I'd be seeing him for a good long while. I wouldn't be paying him a visit anytime soon, that was certain. Except I didn't have to. The next day, Ted walked onto the morning bus like nothing had happened. In fact, nothing had happened. Ted, as it turned out, was among that meager 15% of lucky sons of bitches on the planet who's not affected by urushiol oil at all. No blisters, no rash, not the slightest itch. And while I was pretty sure he'd taken a shower that morning, I still kept my distance from Ted for that day and the next. I didn't want to take the chance. And though Ted felt he was in hell for having to take Ms. Sullivan's math test that day, a math test he had clearly no intention of preparing for the night before, in my eyes he surely didn't understand the massive bullet he'd dodged. Some have said that it's possible to outgrow an allergy to poisonous plants. There are others still who claim that actually eating one can trigger an immunity. After 30-some-odd years of systematically weaving and dodging my way around any suspect crops of leaves, whether consciously or not, I never had the intention of finding out, most especially not by making a goddamn salad out of it. I'd grown accustomed to avoiding it. My quality of life hadn't suffered at all because I didn't go for deep wood hikes or taking up camping or trail jogging. The memory of my childhood suffering had scarred me for life. I wasn't keen on ever revisiting it, and certainly not on purpose. Ted and I kept very close for a long time. Our wives hung out together. Our kids went to the same school. We attended the same church. We even started a business together, a pizza and sub shop. Giuseppe's, that somehow resisted being muscled out by booming franchises. Ted was the real talent behind the place, having developed most of the recipes himself. His pizza sauce was unmatched, which largely accounted for the loyal customer base. I was the business side of things because, if you haven't caught on, Ted was no good with numbers. He couldn't count out proper change for $1, and I was lucky if I could make a cheese sandwich. We were called upon to cater the annual St. Ambrose church picnic. This was last summer, with the days hotter than the deepest ring of Hades, and the comet making its lasting streak across a bit of the night sky. Potluck alone was insufficient for the large gathering, and so Giuseppe's filled in. On the house, of course. It was our parish, after all. Naturally, both of our families were there as well. My son and wife, Ella and Peter, Ted's wife Kim, and his daughter Sophie. Truth be told, it was as boring an affair as always. The adults got by with chit-chat and gossip. The kids had to get creative to remain entertained. Ball, frisbee, hide-and-seek, that sort of thing. St. Ambrose owned a large empty parcel of land adjacent to the church. Most of it had been cleared years ago to make way for an expansion of the cemetery, the old one having been filled to capacity. The old mausoleum nearly there as well. No vacancies, I guess you could say. The dead check in, but they don't check out. Nothing unnatural about it, really. Just old people getting older and drunk people getting dumber, for the most part. It's so old that some early Scottish immigrants had their names chiseled on stone there. It was bound to fill up at some point. Sometime just before noon, Sophie came running over to us from the clearing. She wasn't in tears, but she wasn't happy. "Daddy, Peter lost the frisbee on us, and now it's not fair because he said he wouldn't help me find it." I hung my head, exasperated. I cupped my hands to my mouth and called out, "Peter!" Ted clapped a hand on my back. "Hey, don't get too mad at the kid. It's just a frisbee." I shook my head. "It's the last opening day frisbee I have. Remember those? With the corny phrase you put on it? Besides, that's not the point. And I can only take his 10-year-old attitude so much, you know." "Oh, no. I wouldn't know anything about that," Ted laughed. "Let's go find your kid and his damn frisbee. And hey, that phrase isn't corny, it's poetry." I had a laugh at that as we dropped what we were doing and headed in the direction Sophie had come. As we crested the small hill, I caught sight of Peter in the distance, standing just outside the edge of the woods. His back was to us as he stared into the trees beyond. "Peter!" Hey, Ted said with a gentle tone of reassurance. "He's right there. Take the anger down a notch." I wasn't angry. So far, my son was doing just what I'd hoped he'd do, just what I'd taught him to do. Or rather, not do. If you don't know exactly what's ahead of you in the woods, you don't enter. And when did anyone ever know exactly what was in the woods, even 10 feet in front of them? That's right, not ever. Could be ticks or snakes or a covered-up hole atop a vast underground chasm. Or, need I say it, poison ivy. Peter turned his head around to us at the sound of my voice. His expression was of concern, though from fear of getting in trouble or of what he'd been looking at, I couldn't say. "What's up, kiddo?" Ted said. "Go on in and get the frisbee. It's not going to bite you." "I'm pretty sure that's not what he's afraid of," I said. Ted looked at me with a bit of a puzzled expression. I returned it with a raised eyebrow. He knew what I was getting at. Ted shook his head and sighed. "Oh, for crying out loud. Where is it, Pete?" Without turning back around, my son pointed directly into the woods. "In there. Way in there." "I can't see it, but I can see tons of poison ivy," Ted interrupted. Right. Your dad's got you all worked up about it because he blows up like a balloon near it. Am I right?" "Come on, Ted," I groaned. "Kinda," said Peter. "Only the stuff in here is, like, a lot bigger. And there's something else in there, too." "Yeah, the frisbee," Sophie called out. Peter ignored her remark. "There's a tomb or something in there, next to the huge leaves. Dad, it..." Ted chuckled, though his tone was touched with concern. "The tomb, Pete," he said. "What are we, in Egypt?" Ted sometimes had a fine way of making it difficult to discern the adult from the child in his conversations. "I don't know what you call it," Peter said. "It's like one of those things in graveyards with a big door on it." "Dad, there's sounds coming from inside it, like voices." "What, like a crypt?" said Ted. "What the heck was one of those doing in the woods? They ain't started putting graves out there yet. Look at it. It's been one big open field for years. Must be something else. Don't let some pile of logs or whatever scare you. Think the old crypt keeper's calling you to come visit? Probably left over from when they started clearing it." Sudden realization seemed to strike Peter then, and why he was standing with us, explaining himself. And so he began to ramble on in one breathless play. "Don't let them make me go in there, Dad. That thing scares me. And then there are those huge skinny leaves. You told me to stay away from those and never touch them, so I shouldn't go in there. There's voices in there. Really, please." Okay, take it easy," I said. "No one's going in there." "Hell with that," said Ted. "I'm going in. Poison ivy never got me before. Won't get me now. And the crypt keeper's a little pansy. And you," Ted continued, pointing an accusatory finger at my son, "you should take more responsibility next time. If getting a little itch is what it'll take for you to do the right thing, then so be it." Before I could argue with Ted's attempt at reparenting Peter, he approached the edge of the forest and parted a mass of low-hanging pine branches, then stopped. "Holy..." "See," Peter said. "You see the tomb in there, right?" Ted took a moment to answer as he appeared to survey what he was looking at. "Yeah," he said uncertainly. "It's no pile of logs. Looks like an old crypt, all right. Pretty old one by the looks of it." He turned to look at us. "This was an old cemetery before?" I shrugged. "Not that I ever heard. I mean, there's no headstones, no other graves, just that, in there." "Well, that's not creepy at all," I said. "Just leave it, Ted, seriously. Damn. Kiddo's right about the leaves, too, like the size of elephant ears." "Oh, come on," I said in disbelief. "Then those can't be..." "What did you say?" Ted interrupted. "I was saying that those can't be poison ivy. They aren't that large." No, Ted said, holding up a hand behind him. "It wasn't you. Shh. You hear that?" "Hear what?" Beside the distant commotion from the party we'd left behind, there was nothing. I looked at the kids, who were both slowly backing away, shaking their heads in the negative. "Ah, there!" Ted shouted, now uninterested in whatever noises he'd been hearing. "There you are, you blue bastard. Frisbee's right there." He parted the branches further apart and stepped deeper into the woods, disappearing from sight. The sound of breaking branches followed as he marched inward, spattered with moments of colorful cursing. And about after 10 seconds, there was nothing. "Daddy?" called Sophie. "Did you get it?" A few seconds more. Nothing. "Hey, Ted!" I called out. I silently prayed that I wasn't going to have to enter those woods to look for my friend, but the crack in my voice said it all. Branches cracking again. Ted was running now, running for the clearing. He burst through the overhanging branches where he'd entered, panting, red-faced, and sweating profusely. No Frisbee in sight. "Daddy, where's the Frisbee?" Ted was doubled over, hands on his knees, catching his breath. Sweat soaked his shirt, his face, his hair, even his shorts. Ted's not exactly in shape, but he's not morbidly obese either. A 10-second run in dark woods shouldn't have exerted him like a marathon. "No Frisbee, sweetie," Ted said between wheezing gasps for air. "Like your uncle said, we'll buy you a new one." She began to protest. "Sophie, no. Just go play with something else. We're going to go home soon anyway." She crossed her arms and stormed off. "Uncle Teddy," Peter said, "what happened in there? Did you hear the noises from the tomb?" Ted stood upright and gave me a look that said he wasn't up to talking to a kid about this. "Pete, go catch up with Sophie. We'll probably be leaving soon, too." Peter did as I asked and disappeared over the hill. "All right. So what did happen in there? You look like you just came out of a rainforest. Man, that is the spookiest damn thing I've ever seen." "What, the crypt?" "Well, yeah, the crypt, but not just that. The kid wasn't kidding about the sounds from the crypt in there. Like, I don't know, voices. Damn, those leaves. All over the thing. You wouldn't believe me." "All right. You've succeeded in freaking me out. They, talked to you?" "Moved. Not from wind or anything like that. I marched in the middle of them to get the damn Frisbee, and then something just felt off. Like I thought maybe you'd come in behind me, only I knew you'd never do that. But it felt like someone was there, but it was just all these plants, all around me. And then they moved. Not from the wind or anything like that. It was like they were turning to look at me. Well, I turned and got out of there and left that damn Frisbee for those plants to play with." I snorted, and then the chuckle just followed it on out. I couldn't help it if I tried. "Oh, okay," Ted said, my laughter becoming too contagious for him to avoid. "I see. So why don't you go on in there and get the thing? Damn zombie plants from the crypt. You'll see. You know, I'd clap you on the back, but you're sweater than a Ridley Scott movie." "Ha ha. Well, this ain't sweat. It's dew from all those leaves in there." I stayed far away from Ted for the rest of the walk back. I told myself, as much as Ted did, that the leaves were just covered in dew. How could all that be usual? It just couldn't be. The scars upon the memory of my youth endured, and so I took no chances, even at the expense of Ted's playful jeers. Soon after, each of our families ended the day and we went our separate ways. Ted didn't show up at the shop the next day. Ted would usually open the place up in the morning in order to get it ready for the lunchtime crowd. I'd stroll in sometime later before we actually opened for business. Only this time the doors were locked. Ted hadn't shown up yet. I unlocked the place and went inside to call Ted. After a few rings, Kim answered the phone. She sounded like I'd just woken her up. "Hey, John. Morning. Sorry, did I wake you?" "No, I didn't get much sleep last night. Exhausted." "Is Ted there?" "He didn't show up at the shop today. Place was still buttoned up when I showed up." She sighed with exhaustion and frustration. "Oh, God. I'm sorry, Ted. I should have called you. Ted's worse off than me. It was his tossing and turning all night that kept me up. I eventually had to sleep on the couch. Looks like he caught something at the picnic yesterday. What, like a stomach bug? No. Looks like he got too much sun. Worst sunburn I've ever seen, the poor guy. But I guess it serves him right for not putting on sunscreen. You know how pale he is. Paler than a beluga whale, yeah, I said, punctuated with a sigh of defeat. All right, so I guess he's out of commission today. Tell him to call me when he's up and about. She acknowledged and hung up. I went about making a closed sign for the door and directing our phone to a voicemail message stating the same. There was no way I was attempting to run the place without Ted. I left and spent the day doing long neglected chores around the house. Spending time with Ella that day made me realize that we'd both somehow come out of the previous day with nary a scant tan, much less evidence of a sunburn. What's more, it was an overcast day. We hadn't worn any lotion. Later that night, my cell phone rang. It was Ted. He sounded as ragged as Kim had that morning. Hey, man. Sorry I didn't call you sooner. Yeah, sure, I said. Don't sweat it. You all right? No, I'm not. Jesus, from a sunburn? How bad can it be? Sunburn? No, this ain't no sunburn. Gotta be poison ivy. It's just like hell. It took all I had to keep the phone in my hand as my mouth fell open. I suddenly felt my own skin begin to take on that characteristic burn. My palms began to itch, my mind telling me my body that it too was once again stricken with the rash. The mere mention of it was enough, like an instinctive cringe. Once more, Ted, of all people, had succumbed to it. How? I thought you weren't allergic, I managed to say with some measure of disbelief. Yeah, well, it happens, I guess. He said, Listen, I gotta go. It's... God, the itchings. I have to go. Before I could ask about what we should do about the shop, he hung up. It's not unheard of for someone who'd once had immunity to something like poison ivy suddenly to lose it over time. Ted suddenly showing signs of a reaction normally wouldn't have surprised me. In fact, his lack of reaction all this time was the more surprising thing to me. And more surprising than all of that was how quickly it had taken a hold of him. He'd gone from 0 to 100 seemingly overnight. There was nothing I could really do for Ted. He'd seen firsthand what I'd gone through in the past, what meager remedies I'd resorted to for alleviating the itching and swelling. It's all I could do then, and all he had now. I faced the fact that it was clear Giuseppe's was staying closed for at least another day. Depending on how bad off Ted was Tuesday night, I'd have to consider my options, like hiring some temporary help. I wasn't the best cook, but at least I could keep the business afloat. Late the next morning, I gave Ted a call to see how he was faring. He'd likely faced another sleepless night, so I wasn't surprised when Kim picked up. Hey, Kim, how's Teddy doing? Hope you at least got some sleep last night. I slept okay. Ted didn't sleep in the bed all night, stayed up closed in the den all yesterday, and last night didn't want anyone to go near him. Trust me, we didn't want to. He was in a mood, as you can imagine. I woke up a couple of times in the night and heard him downstairs, grunting, swearing. Must have been driving him nuts. But I guess he must be doing better. I woke up to the smell of him cooking breakfast. Not that he left us any. Just a dirty skillet. Nice, right? And now he's gone off somewhere. Seriously, he went out? Though I was amazed Ted hadn't got worse overnight, I was relieved. Maybe check the shop, Kim suggested. She'd read my mind. When I pulled up to Giuseppe's, I noticed one of the exhaust vents on the roof billowing smoke. More than usual, in fact. Ted's car was nowhere in sight, which wasn't entirely unusual. since he'd lived only a couple of miles away and sometimes made the walk. I thought that was a good sign, that Ted really was on the mend and getting things prepared for the afternoon customers. Except when I got to the front door, my temporarily closed sign still hung in the window. I figured Ted hadn't noticed it, so I pulled it down as I entered. I could hear Ted busy at work in the back kitchen. The air was already hot with the warming pizza ovens, griddles, and fryers. One of the oven doors had been left open, and I could see the remnants of what looked like a pizza mishap smeared upon the oven's fire brick floor. Pretty early for pizza, I thought, but we served all kinds. "Ted, you back there? What happened here? Oven's a mess." The sound of the kitchen fryer answered, its contents being lowered into the 325-degree oil. And then something else. A man's exhale of intense relief. No pleasure. I rounded the corner into the kitchen. Ted's back was to me, facing the fryers. He wore nothing but a pair of boxers, and his skin was like nothing I'd seen before. My sneakers squeaked to a halt as the breath caught in my throat. I stumbled backwards, catching myself on a counter. Oozing sores covered half of Ted's back and legs. The other half was covered in blisters the size of golf balls. "Ted!" I managed to breathe as I fought back my hyperventilation. Of course, he couldn't react, because when I say he was facing the fryers, I meant that in a much more literal sense. His entire face was submerged in the steaming fryer oil, up to his hairline. I would have thought him dead, but a second later he stood upright. Grease poured down over his shoulders and trickled down his back. More of the blisters withered and broke apart under the oil's heat. And once again, Ted sighed in ecstasy. "Ted!" What was meant to be a scream came more like a strained whisper. I threw a hand over my mouth, either due to pure disbelief over what I was seeing, or to stop myself from being sick, or both. He straightened and turned around, my feet instinctively making a slow retreat sideways, toward the door. What I was looking at was not Ted, not anymore. This person was unrecognizable as a human being, in all but frame. Strips of red, smoking flesh peeled away from his forehead and cheeks. The bare muscle and bone behind glistening with oil. Lips, there were no lips. A set of teeth in a perpetual skeletal grin. The tongue behind, bloated and red, peeking out behind them. Eyelids hung like useless flaps. His arms, his chest, all bare of skin, looking like an anatomy poster. His arms blackened and charred. All that seemed to remain intact was most of the surface of his legs, and I could see blisters there continue to form before my eyes. "John," Ted said, his voice guttural, nearly unrecognizable, but calm and eerily satisfied. "John, you were so right. Screw the calamine lotion. All you need to do to get rid of that goddamn itching is heat. Once you've got that, oh, it's euphoria, Johnny. Pure euphoria." He held up his hands then, his hands that I hesitate to describe, beyond that they were surely not usable appendages anymore. Something fell from what used to be his face onto the floor, joining a mess of fried flesh within puddles of spent grease. I couldn't touch him. Jesus, I couldn't stop him. "Ted! Oh, Ted! Oh, no, 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 no!" He breathed a wet sigh again, somehow peeling away a flap of loose, cooked skin from his forehead with one of his red, bony fingers. He threw it aside like a rotten slice of tomato. "It's okay, John," he gurgled. "It's almost all gone now. Just a little more heat and I'll be all better. This is so much better than the oven." He turned back around and held his breath as I held mine. I turned and ran. When I made it outside, I called 911. The police and ambulance arrived moments later. I watched as EMT after EMT entered and promptly exited, retching into the flower beds outside, before finally composing themselves to enter and save Ted's life. I was told if they'd only been a few minutes later, he'd have been gone. In all my life, I'd never seen a reaction to plants like that, let alone experience it myself. What further floored me was this had been Ted's reaction to whatever was in those woods. A man who'd been immune to poison ivy for as long as I could remember. What would those things do to someone like me? I talked to my wife and told her she'd have to pick up Peter from the choir practice at church that afternoon. I also called Kim, and she and I spent most of the day at the hospital. Not a stitch of him was not covered in thick bandages, and he'd lost most of his fingers. The CDC apparently was being called in, and we were told that Ted was going to be put into an induced coma. I couldn't bring myself to see him like that anymore, and I wasn't sure what to tell Kim about what I saw at the shop. How was I to explain to anyone that he'd done this on purpose? An accident? A pure, unfortunate, unholy accident. That was enough. I wasn't sure if Ted was going to pull through. There was no doubt that his recovery, if he had one, would be agonizing. At the cost of removing whatever pure hell he'd been experiencing before, would he say it was worth it? I couldn't fathom it. Covered in pure scar tissue, skin grafts for the rest of your life, it's unlikely he'd have to worry about something like poison ivy ever again. My mind, just as Ted's unfortunate body, would be scarred for life. I called for a car to take me home. I was in no condition to drive. As I exited the car at the bottom of the hill, I heard Peter call out from the driveway, "Hey, Dad, catch!" I was still dazed from what had happened earlier, and had little time to react. Stars blossomed in darkness, as whatever Peter had thrown smacked me in the forehead and fell to the ground. I along with it. I put my hand to my throbbing head, pulling back to see blood. Damn! Well, that's going to leave a scar, I muttered to myself. Peter ran up and squatted beside me, his face reddened with embarrassment. "Oh, man! Dad, you okay?" "I'm so sorry. I thought you'd catch it." "Yeah, well, my reaction's not all it used to be." I reached down beside me to pick up what Peter had thrown, and the words upon a circle of blue greeted my disbelieving eyes. "Fly into Giuseppe's empty. Fly out full." I hope you enjoyed Scars by author Keith McDuffee, as performed by yours truly. If you enjoyed the tales you've heard tonight, I'd like to remind you one last time that tonight's featured author can be found by visiting our website. Just visit simplyscarypodcast.com/McDuffie. That's simplyscarypodcast.com/MCDUFFEE. He's got a wide variety of other tales to tempt your restless sleep, so don't be afraid to take a gander. As a reminder, if you do decide to give any of this talented author's stories a read, please consider leaving them a quality review and a kind word, or a thoughtful public comment and an update. And be sure to let them know you heard about them on this program and that Otis Jiry sent you. It means more to me than you can imagine, and I'm sure Keith would appreciate it as well. Thanks again for your support of this show and of tonight's featured author. Now, before we go, I'd also like to take a moment to thank you personally for joining me for this episode of Scary Stories Told in the Dark. If you enjoyed what you've heard on today's program, please take a moment to stop by our iTunes page or wherever else you listen to your favorite podcasts and leave us a 5-star review and a kind word. It makes a huge difference and would mean a lot to us. If you'd like to hear a premium extended edition of tonight's and all of our other episodes featuring Twice the Terror, visit simplyscarypodcast.com today and click the Patrons link in the menu at the top of the screen. you'll find yourself at chillingtalesfordarknights.com, where you can purchase season passes for this podcast and our other quality storytelling programs, or become a patron for as little as $5 per month and get access to our entire audio archive dating back to 2012, all of it ad-free. If you happen to use Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or YouTube, you can follow and subscribe to Chilling Tales for Dark Nights there, where you'll get all of our latest updates and new releases and have the chance to interact with us each and every week. You can subscribe to me on YouTube as well at the Otis Jiry channel, where you'll find my releases of horror storytime dating back to 2014, and you can find me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram too. Just search for Otis Jiry. Until next week, stay spooky. Get some sleep if you can.
Thanks for listening. You've been listening to Scary Stories Told in the Dark, a production of Chilling Entertainment and the creative team at Chilling Tales for Dark Nights, and a proud member of the Simply Scary Podcasts Network. Visit simplyscarypodcast.com today to learn more about our network and our other amazing storytelling programs. Tonight's program was hosted, and its featured stories performed by yours truly, Otis Jiry. Selected stories have been adapted with the kind permission of their respective authors. Original music provided by Luke Hodgkinson and Jesse Cornett. Sound design and final mixing and mastering provided by executive producer and director Craig Groshek. Program's artwork and logo by David Romero. If you're looking for some fresh tales on a daily basis while waiting for the next podcast, check out my YouTube channel, the Otis Jiry channel, and my extensive collection of narrated tales there. Simply search on YouTube by my name, and you'll find me. And don't forget to subscribe and press the bell notification icon to get my latest releases. Got a scary tale of your own that you'd like performed? I take submissions. Email it to me today at otis@simplyscarypodcast.com to have your terrifying tome considered for production in a future episode of this show. That's OTIS@simplyscarypodcast.com. If you've enjoyed what you heard on tonight's program and are joining us on your favorite podcast app, subscribe to us to be sure you never miss an episode, and leave a 5-star review and a comment. Your feedback means a lot to me. You can also follow Chilling Tales for Dark Nights and yours truly on Facebook to connect anytime and get the latest updates on this and other programs and my channel. If you're listening on the Chilling Tales for Dark Nights YouTube channel, do us a favor and hit the subscribe button and the bell notification icon for ctfdn as well to get more spooky tales from me and the crew and another episode of this program each and every Wednesday. And don't forget to hit that thumbs up button to tell us how we're doing and leave a kind word or a request. And don't forget to visit us at chillingtalesfordarknights.com and consider supporting the team by becoming a patron. In addition to helping us out, you'll get exclusive access to our audio archive and ad-free downloads of all your favorite stories, including those you've heard on this program. As for me, I'll be back next Wednesday with more terrifying tales to keep you up all night. But that's all right. Who needs sleep anyway?
Chilling Tales for Dark Nights.